You know, my room really is bright, but it doesn't look like that on the
Hmm.
screen.
Hi, everyone. This is Susie J. Cobwebs, and today I have a wonderful guest with me. She is another author, and we are going to talk about the different writing processes and time management, balancing our life with being a author or being an author, I should say. And I would just like to introduce Mariana. Is it Boncheck?
Bonsek.
Boncheck. Oh, hello, hello, hello. So, obviously, you are an author. And what books do you like to write?
Uh, I really consider myself a fiction writer. Though, if you look at what I've published, you'd be like, nah, because I have two nonfiction books, a YA novel, tons of poetry. I've written some plays, but I really consider myself a fiction writer.
Fiction.
So, and I have two books of fiction. So, yeah, I love fiction. I love going into those fantasy worlds. Even if they sound realistic, they're still fantasy.
Yes, yes. I actually write myself young adult fiction. And with my first book, and we'll get to this in a second. With my first book, I really didn't know where I wanted to be. Did I want to be a young adult? Did I want to be a new adult? Did I want to be a romance? You don't know at this point until you start really writing and seeing where you feel the most comfortable. At least that's what I think. So with this, um, so do you read young adult, or do you read not young adult, but do you read fiction books?
Oh, absolutely. I read all the time. I read everything. But I had my young adult book was actually my third book. I wrote two books of nonfiction first.
Oh, okay.
And I love to tell the story, so I'm going to tell it. I don't
Okay.
want to say I became an accidental author because I always wanted to write, but I wasn't sure how to get into it. And I went to believe it or not, a paranormal conference. It wasn't even a writing conference. It was kind of like a fun thing. I was going to do it with
Yes.
my daughter. And there was a table with a woman sitting all by herself. There wasn't anything on it except her and a little card that said authors wanted. So I have, to this day, do not know what possessed me. I walked over and said, I can write a book for you.
I
And so she started to ask me questions and I answered them, like, what do I do? And she goes, well, we need a book of ghost stories from the Hudson Valley. And I said, okay, I'll write that for you. So she takes my information. I take her card. I go back to my daughter. We're driving home and I'm laughing. I'm like, this is never going to happen. 3 days later, I get a contract in the mail. Before I can even think, I sign it and send it back. And then for 2 weeks, I walk around the house going, what have I done? I have no idea how to write a book. I don't know what I'm going to do. And one day I was in Barnes and Noble. I looked around at all those books and I said, someone just like me wrote every single one of those books.
Yes.
I can do it. It took me 2 years, but that's how I wrote my first book. So it was just like, I don't want to say it was an accident, but it was an accident.
Mine was a little bit different. um, so I knew I was a writer ever since I was a little girl. And I would write about, Santa Claus and Easter Bunny and this and that. And it was always some type of fiction writing. Well, I hit high school. By high school, I had a first draft. At least I thought this was wonderful. Unfortunately, the teacher did not and totally massacred it. So I thought, well, I guess I'm not going to be a writer. This is not where I need to be. Whatever. Don't you know, my senior year, I got that same teacher back.
Uh-oh.
Yes. And of course, when your senior project comes about, she looked at my senior project. She said, I know you can do better. I need you to do better. Fine. So I did the senior project. I let that slide. So I took a different route in my life. I had kids, got married, all 9 yards, and put writing on the back burner. Went to college, had the same rough type of scenario, had a 40-page project and all 9 yards. And even that professor said, "You have a rough draft of a novel."
Oh, good.
And I thought to myself, how can I compete with Danielle Steele, Stephen King? Like, there's no way that I'd ever put myself in that realm. All right, fine. Let it alone for a little bit. Did my project, graduated college, kids grew up, got rid of the husband, the house, and whatever. Found a man that is really very supportive in my writing, lets me write. Although that project now became my first book,
Great as that. Yeah.
and unfortunately I couldn't find the professors that I needed. But that's okay. I got to that point where I wrote that first book. Took me 13 years
Oh, of course. Yeah.
because I didn't have the mindset of writing a book. Although you think, okay, you're going to be a writer, you write the book, you do this, you do that, whatever. But until you really think that you are good enough to be a published author, that was where my issue was. So my man said, "You know what? Publish your book." I'm like, okay. I don't know how to do this, but okay, we'll do this. So once I published the book, everything is great. You know what? I could do better. So now book two came. And as you start seeing, okay, I start learning the different writing processes of what's going to work for me because I still have a full time job and I do a lot of overtime in that process. So I have learned time management and learning how to do this, that, and whatever in my novel and learn the different conflicts and different subplots and whatnot. So it does take a lot of time.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm glad that I've done it. And I'll continue to keep doing it, actually. So that's basically how I started. Um, but for the most part, I'm actually proud of myself. Like, I think that immensely you are very proud of yourself because you conquered something that you wanted to do. So I want to get into like your writing processes
Um,
and how do you balance time with writing? Because you still work also,
yes, I
obviously.
do. I do. I work full time. I do
Yeah,
a lot of, I say I do everything full time. I think,
right? Really?
yeah, I do everything full time. What,
I
you
tried
know, I think each person has to figure out what works for them. And a lot of times
to.
they don't spend that time saying, this doesn't work for me. They just keep doing the same thing over and over again and not
Yep.
getting any writing done. So what works for me, what works for you could be totally different things. What works,
Yes.
so like I do a word limit per day.
Oh,
And
okay.
of course, when I first started writing, it was very low, but now
Right.
my goal is 1,500 words a day. So if I have a really great day and write 3 to 5,000 words,
Yeah.
maybe I can take a little time off. But I actually have a whiteboard that I have several whiteboards in my office, and so every day I update the word count.
Oh, wonderful.
Then I have a goal, and when I hit the top word count, I now have. But I think because we're women, everything comes first.
Competition in your head.
Yeah, well, everything comes first but us. And
Yes.
I always say that I was very lucky because I was raised with all brothers. I'm the only girl. So I jokingly say I was raised a boy, and people are like, "Oh, you're trans." Like, no, 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 I'm not.
No.
But I was raised where I had as role models young men who, put themselves first. So I don't mind doing that. In my head, writing
Mhm.
is a job. It's not a hobby. It's
Oh,
not something I do on the side. it is my job. So just as my first job, it takes priority. And of course, you don't see behind the computer where my room is a mess right now.
Right?
But,
I get
women,
it.
yeah, women want a perfectly clean house. They want to go to every single child event. They want to
Yes.
be community members. They want to be A1 on their jobs. And at some point, something has to give, and it's always writing. And
Yes.
I decided very early on that was not what was going to give with me.
Yeah.
And as a result, I have a very messy house, but I get a lot of work done. And I also love writing. So once I tell people if I don't write, I'm going to start getting grouchy. And
Yes.
so maybe it's my meditation. Some people meditate,
Yes.
but I have to sit down, clear my head, write a scene. And I write a lot of things so I can bounce back and forth between,
Yes.
if I'm working on a novel that day, that's great. If I'm working on poetry, if I'm working on a play, so I can bounce back and forth. I also, I don't know whether you want to call it the absent-minded professor or whatever, but once I get something in my head, it's there every moment, no matter what I'm doing. And I always think that your brain is working in the background. And
Yes.
when it comes, it comes. I sit down, I write the scene, whatever. We've all had that moment where we're in traffic and it's like, where's the parking lot? Because I got to write this down right now. So
Yes.
it's like, yeah. So I'm very, and you read Stephen King's book and you would think that he's like the god of writing. Let's be honest. We've seen Stephen King shopping. He does not write every 365 days a year,
Right.
even though he claims he does. So that's my goal. I'd love to write 365 days a year, but we get sick. There's an obligation. But
Mhm.
that whiteboard, because I have a date on it, if I glance at it and the date's getting a little far away, that's not cool with me. Sit down, get something
Right.
ready. So, I just, again, I want to reiterate that I think so many people don't even understand their own process.
Right.
They'll say, "Oh, I write well at night," but then they'll like confess that, "Well, I fall asleep because, I'm so tired." Well, then you don't write well at night,
No. No.
like you don't. So, and it takes a long time to
It
figure
does.
out, some people say, I'll get up. I have a friend who gets up at like 3 hours before her job and writes. And I'm like, there's no way I'm getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to
No.
write. What's
That's
going
way
to
too
happen
much.
is I'm going to be drooling on my keyboard. That's not going to happen.
Mm.
So, and when you start keeping track, you start realizing, I really wrote well on my lunch break or whatever. Well,
Yes.
that's the time then you need to carve that out to do your writing. And people are like, well, I don't have little children anymore, which I don't, but
I don't either.
I work full time.
Mhm.
I'm still going to school full time. I will never stop going to school. I'm, producing writing that you just, if you want to have a Netflix binge, you're not going to write. It doesn't
Right.
mean that there aren't days that, yeah, I just need to sit down and just,
Yes. There
not.
are times you have to relax your brain.
But
Right.
we get into habits where, I just see so many people, they work, they come home, they eat, they turn their television on, they go to sleep, they get up, they work. And I'm not judging anybody,
No. No.
but once you decide you want something, you got to figure out where
When,
you're going to fit that. Yeah.
where you could fit it in.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tried in the beginning, when I really wanted to focus on writing a book. Well, actually, it was towards the end of my first book, I think, and I was working at my job. And I'm like, okay, so I only have a certain amount of time allotted to me. Yes, you have to go to work. Yes, at this point, I was still going back and forth, traveling back and forth to work, which was a 45-minute drive there. So by the time I would get home, you're still doing, dinner, this, that, whatever. And I wanted to put that into my schedule. Where was I going to put it? And when they come up with NaNoWriMo, that
Yep.
novel thing,
Yep. NaNoWriMo. Yep.
um, they wanted, and I'm sure I could do it if I didn't have a full time job with overtime, but they wanted like 50,000 words in 1 month. And I'm like, there is no way I'm going to set
I can do
myself
that.
up for failure.
I can do
I
that.
know this. So, and I told myself, okay, I know that right now I cannot do 50,000 words a month. However, what I can do is 5,000 words a month. I know that was a little much, but at least you start off with
Yep.
something slow.
Yep.
Okay,
And you're
so
moving forward.
$5,000, 5,000 words a month. Okay, let's go from there. Let's see how that works out.
Mhm.
Do that for about a month. And if you see that you're making 10,000 words a month, then up that. You always want to strive for something better. Eventually, you will get to that 50,000 words a month, but not right now.
But you know what? It doesn't matter because I have a friend who writes 300 words a day. And to me, it's like 300 words. I can like
Like,
write that in 15
that's a
minutes.
paragraph.
But you know what?
That's okay.
She's getting things published.
Yes.
And it's like, where is the race? I'm a huge goal setter. So, in which
Yes.
people call me a little obsessive compulsive about it. But you
Yeah.
know what? My 1,500 words a day, her 300 words a day, who cares?
Who cares?
If that's what works for you,
Yes.
that's what works for you. And so who cares? Like, I think of some of the great novels that took 10 years, 20 years to
Yeah.
write. Now, if your goal is to be a full-time writer, then you have to look in the mirror and do something different. But most of us will only make residual income from our writing. It's kind of like acting,
Right.
the way
Right.
you be an
Whatever
actor.
you put out there is
Yeah.
what you're going to get back.
Yeah. But most actors don't make a lot of money. They all have to do something else. But
Yeah.
they're acting. And so if you're writing 300 words a day, you're writing,
Yeah.
you're better than the person who just dreams of it every day,
Right.
because in 10
I
days, you're going to have 3,000 words and they're going to have nothing. So,
yeah.
so I think we get a little judgment. Well, that they say writers, have these, they're their own worst enemies, and they are.
They are.
Um, but
They are.
I am a massive goal setter. So I always have, and I have whiteboards in my room where I think it's important for your goal to be visible because you
Yes.
forget it. And I always date everything because you're a mom, that you think that happened 3 days ago and it really happened 3 weeks ago, because we lose track of time because it's like we're on a treadmill and
Yes.
you're like, oh yeah, I wrote yesterday, and you realize I didn't write yesterday. I wrote 5 days ago. So that's why I have the whiteboards, because they're a visual reminder that that's the last time you put something up there. So get, some people have calendars or agendas, but I
Yes.
think it's so important to see. Thank God computers, when you pull up your
Yes.
document, it tells you the last time you were in it. And sometimes they go, wait, I haven't been in this document in 10, like, what the
2
heck?
weeks.
Yeah. It's like, I just thought I wrote this scene, 3 days ago. And you realize that so that I think that's the problem is, people say, well, I have different priorities. And the truth is, you don't have priorities, you have habits.
You have habits.
You've gotten into this habit and you think they're your priorities, but if you sat down,
Right.
you're like, I forget who said it. It might have been Stephen King. I doubt it though, but we always are, give yourself your best. We always want to give our job our best and this
Yes.
our best. Give yourself your
The
best.
best.
And I'm a teacher. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to do a good job, but I am not going to give them every spare minute of my time.
Right.
So do your best and
Yes.
give yourself your best. I think that's why, my friend writes her 300 words in the morning, because that's when she's at her best. So she gives herself her best first. Yeah. So So
I did the word count for a while. And not the saying that I can't do it, because I can. But what I've noticed, that added a little bit more stress onto my brain. Like, that was not something that was going to work for me.
yeah.
Now, what works for me is right now, because of COVID, I now work from home. which is wonderful
Yeah.
because now that took off the extra drive time. And so I have a little bit of extra time on my hands.
Yeah.
But what really works for me is the fact that I can grab a notebook. I mean, it doesn't matter where I'm at. I'll grab my notebook, I have wherever. And if I think of something, if I think of dialogue, or if I think of descriptions for something, it doesn't matter if it's whatever novel I'm going to work on anyway. Write it down, write what you think, write what you know. What are they saying? You can change the names, you can change a little bit of part of that paragraph, but eventually that paragraph that I just wrote down is going to end up in one of my novels. So once I write it down in my notebook, write it down, once I'm able to get to my computer, my laptop, then I'll transcribe it into the proper place that it needs to be in, wherever I need it, in whatever book that I was hopefully thinking it was going to be published later.
The
So
most
as
important
I
thing is
keep doing it that way, so I'm like, my scatterbrained is not so much going against me. I'm using it for myself.
the most important thing is you have it, because if you
Yes.
don't write it down,
Right.
and I don't care, we all have that 3 o'clock in the morning. We had a great idea. We go back to sleep. We wake up at 6 and it's gone. But the
Right.
idea is that you have it. And even if
Right.
you don't use it, it may inspire something else. Like, oh, well, I wrote that she did this, but you know what? I think I really want her to do that. So, everybody, I always say you really like write 4 novels when you write one, because so much
Yes.
of which you cut and put back in and cut and put back in, but you have it. I mean, we would never say to somebody learning baseball that your first pitch has to be beautiful. They're going
No.
to pitch thousands of times. We're going to write so
Yes.
many pages. I mean, I think I have a novel coming out, Diamond City, and I cut whole chapters, like boom. And people are like,
Yes.
oh my God, you wasted all that time. No, I
No,
didn't.
you didn't.
That chapter maybe inspired something else, but when I went through, that chapter wasn't moving the story forward. So out it went.
Yes.
And, I think I went to see Joyce Carol Oates speak once, and she says her novels range about 300 pages, but the first draft is 800, so we write all this stuff. And I tend to,
Yes.
I have journals. I know everything about my characters. I know their astrological signs. I know their favorite color. I know their favorite food. And it's like, well, why do you know that? Because you're not going to put that in your novel. Well, maybe at some point I do,
I
but
do.
I want to know when something happens, how my character is going to react. And by doing all that back work, I'm like, oh no, his favorite color is green. He's not going to be driving, a red car,
Right.
that kind of thing. And you just, so sometimes you'll be just daydreaming and say, I think he likes this, and I'll write it down, because that can help, when you're stuck. You can go back to, like, well, wow, well, how did I describe? Oh, okay. And that helps me a lot. So that little jotting, I encourage people to go to meetings at work to, they think you're taking notes, your boss, just writing it out, like, yeah, look at this, I'm taking notes, boss. But those little, I always have a notebook with me, but
Yes. Me too.
yeah, I have a lot of organizers when I'm writing a novel, which I just started a new one. I
Yes.
have books where I have character descriptions, and as stupid as this sounds, I will search the internet to find a picture of someone who I think looks like my character, and I put them up on my whiteboard, just because that inspires me. Sometimes I'll
Yes.
walk in the room and I'll be like, oh, look, Art wants me to write today, so I better sit down and do it, because he's got things to do. And it's like, people don't understand authors. Like, once I start a novel, I almost feel like I have a moral obligation to finish it, because I've created a life. And if I don't finish this novel, he doesn't get to live his life. So, and it's
Yes.
crazy, because it's not true. He's not a real person. But you're like, oh my gosh, if you don't tell their story, they're a make believe person. No one will tell their story. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, and that's with you brought up a couple different good points. Well, with my first book, I said that was from my college. I never knew at that point that this would be a four book series.
Cool.
That was just an an assignment that was given to me. I did it, I finished it. I'm like, but the characters aren't done yet.
Yeah.
Like now you're because your mind's still going in these characters, and okay, well, I could do this and I can do that.
Yeah.
So now my book two is just about to be coming out of that series. And I've learned so much from book one to book two,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. Like I know what I missed, even though book one is good. I know what I missed. So now book two is going to get better, and it's just a learning process.
Well, and your reader
Right.
doesn't know that. Your reader
Right.
doesn't
Right.
know that you have a
I'm
scene in
still
your
learning.
Yes. That you have a scene in your head or what happened in their childhood. So I call that like I love to walk. And to me, that's when the ideas start
Yes.
to filter through. And when it's like this isn't done. This isn't I thought it was done. My
But it's not.
I have a book that's coming out and I wrote it has two parts. So
Mhm,
I wrote part one and I book done, right?
mhm.
So I sat down one day to write, and out of the blue comes this scene, and I'm like, "Oh, book not done, book not done." And
Nope.
then it's like, "Oh my god!" So then I had to write part two because it's like, it's not done. There's
Right.
still, and so
I
it's
could do so much more with this.
and this will sound bizarre because I'm a very grounded, practical person, but there's
Yes.
something metaphysical about writing books.
Hmm.
Um, and weird things happen, and we know that's got to be a product of the process or the product of the brain, but it feels almost magical. I have a
Yeah.
book that's not published yet, and I was really struggling with one of the characters, and I'm like, I didn't know how to fix the problem in the book.
Hmm.
And that night I had a dream and I saw the character sitting on a bench waiting for the bus. And it was like, that's it.
That's what I
That's
need.
that's
That's what
like
I need.
that's it. And I got up. The problem was I was writing with two voices the book, and she told me it's not two voices, it's my book. And once I realized it was her story, the whole thing just fell into place.
Yes.
And people will say that's kind of metaphysical. Well, maybe it is, but maybe it's your brain, the way your brain works. But when you start
Yes.
dreaming about your characters, it's like you listen, you listen,
Yeah.
So and that's what being a writer is. Everybody thinks it's all this big thing, but your
It's
brain starts working as a writer. Yeah, I'm a teacher, I'm this, I'm that. But back there in my brain, even if I'm not conscious of it, it's working out the plots, it's working out the
yes.
stories, it's working out the characters. And if you don't sit down on a regular basis and write, you're going to forget it.
Right.
Even your unconscious stuff is going to slip away and you will never get it back. So, you knowing that you finished your first book, but wait a second, it's not done. Nobody knows that unless you
Right.
sit down and you write it. And then people can see, like, oh, yeah, it wasn't done. So,
Right.
yeah. So, yeah.
I use the same type of concept. Now you do it with your characters, but I do the same type of concept if I need like an outfit or
Mhm.
a description or of something, but I can't put it in my head. So I'll go online, kind of look like what I need.
Yeah.
Okay, how do I describe this?
Yeah.
So then I'll describe it and then I'll put it into my novel somewhere, so it can kind of fit and I still get my description out that I need. I still get what I want to portray to, the readers. And another thing that I also use to my benefit is music. So there could be a concept, then you think, okay, what is the main concept? Like, what is this character doing? What is this going, how is it going to happen? So then you try to find music to try to put you into like that mode. So, for example, I have a character that is divorced. I'm trying not to like give it like is divorced, um, but wants to be out in the dating scene, but doesn't want to be out in the dating scene because they're not ready. Because, for whatever happened, marriage is in their head and you can't be, just in that time frame where you want to be out with, another person, but that almost kind of feels like it's cheating, even though you're not cheating on them because you've been divorced, like that type of mindset. So there's a lot of music out there that if I just keep listening to that music, and then of course back in your brain, you're taking all that research in, even though people were thinking, oh yeah, you're singing this song, you're singing that song. Okay, fine. But I'm actually doing research of how I can build that character into the novel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so there's all these different ways that you can build up this novel, build up your characters, build up the descriptions, your subplots, whatever it is.
Yeah. I have to write in silence, but the important thing that you said is you found a way to do
To use it to my
something.
benefit.
So use it. I strongly believe in writing rituals unless the
Yes.
ritual gets in the way. So, some people are like, I can only write with a felt tip pen. Well, if you don't have a felt tip pen and you got an idea, you better freaking sit down and
You
write
gotta
it.
find that pen.
Like some people, their ritual gets in the way, but some people it helps. So if putting
Yes.
on a certain kind of music is going to get you in the mood for that scene, do it. But if putting on a certain kind of music is going to make you want to clean your closet, don't put that music on,
Yeah.
So, and that's what I mean, being honest with yourself,
Yes.
that,
And that's one of the things you have to do.
is that going to help me? And if you notice that it's not, well, don't
You
do
need
it.
to change it.
But that's, we're such creatures of habit that,
Yes.
I can only write in my living. I'm a teacher and I used to tell people, hey, I can only write in my office. Well, then I'm not going to write anywhere else. So I do carry a book with me. And now sometimes if I have 10 minutes, I love to be one of those marathon writers. I sit down, I write for hours, but this is modern life. We don't
You
have
can't do that. You
that
can't.
every day. So, a lot of times if I have it, I'll take that journal and that's where I'll start for the day. Let me type up all that stuff I've been, jotting in my journal, and then I'm gone. Then I'm ready to go. I'm on the roll. But yeah, so it's like being a writer means being honest, at least with your writing. I don't care about
Yes.
the rest of your life. If you don't want to be honest, that's fine. But and it's hard. It
Yeah.
really is hard to be honest with yourself. And this didn't happen for me like overnight. I just didn't
Oh
sit down.
no.
Oh
Oh
yeah,
no.
now I'm a writer. It took years
Yes.
of, and then what works for one book may not
It's
work
not
for
going to
the
work for
next.
another one.
My young adult novel, which is very short, I did have music on the whole time I was writing it, and I'm not a music person, but it's like it's not going to work on my new novel, so don't do it. So yeah, so it's kind of, you have to figure out, and sometimes it takes a lot of figuring.
Yes.
um, the
Yes.
book that I had the problem with, the two, it took probably a year of writing and rewriting. And then when I had that dream, it was like, it works. Okay, got it. We're good. Sometimes stepping away works. Like, I
Yes.
can't figure it out. I'm just going to leave it for a couple weeks or
Yes.
whatever. And then I'll come back to it. And maybe that doesn't work. So you got to try something else. And it's really hard sometimes to say, this one isn't ready to be written right now.
Right.
I'm let's
I
move on.
can't do it right now. I have too much on my plate.
Or it's just not
Let me
working,
let me
let me move on to
I'll
another
move
one.
that off to the side. I'll deal with that later.
Yeah, and then maybe you can come back to it, because that I always say I work on 2 projects at a time, because when I get stuck with one, I don't want to be doing nothing. So
Right.
let's go pick
Right.
up the other one. And then when I get stuck on that, I can
I'll go
come.
back.
Yeah. And you can, well, actually, I say I have two. I probably have more like 20 that I'm
Right.
working on
Right.
at a time. And I actually have a project book
Mhm.
that I write them in because let's say now I'm like, I don't know what I want to do next or I feel stuck with this. I'll open the project book and say, oh, I had started the notes for this one. Maybe it's time to go back
Yes.
to that one. Um, and what happens if you have 5 novels in progress, you're not starting from scratch when you finish one. You're like,
No.
oh, I have this one in progress. Even if
I'll
it's
just
just
start this
notes.
one.
Yeah, even if it's just notes, like you're
Yes.
like, oh yeah,
This is what I was thinking.
and I believe a novel can't be written until it's ready. Now that sounds
Right.
really
Right. Right.
metaphysical,
Right.
but maybe your mind isn't ready to write it. But so leave it there. And one day, and I hate when I'm writing a novel and another one starts pressing in on my brain, and this other
I'll write you
story,
down,
I'm
but
like,
I can't be
stop,
with
I'm
you
in
right
the middle of
now.
writing something. And then all of a sudden, and I'm a planner, so I will plan. I'll say, okay, in March, I'm going to work on this. And then, of course, March 1st, it's down and I find myself working on something else. And it's like, okay,
Mhm.
all right, I have to, because I am very scheduled and I have learned to try to be a little more flexible
Yes.
with getting things done. So, yeah, so I actually, I just, like I said, I have a project book and because sometimes I forget because I'm like, hey, I started that a year ago. And it's like, wow, I started this a year ago and I have 40 pages. Like, well, I better, maybe this is
But
worth coming
also,
back.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
because, yes, you're going to write a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 5 pages, whatever. But at that time, you thought that was, I'm not saying your best writing, but that is the writing that was coming out of your head at that time.
Mhm.
So, unfortunately, there could be times where you can't get back to that project. Let's just
Yeah.
say 5 years. Hey, it happens. Life happens. Other books happen,
Yes.
whatever.
Other projects.
Other
Yeah.
projects happen. Hey, life always changes in a hot second. But whenever you go back to that book or that paragraph or pages that you wrote, and you try to revise it because we have to edit this 15 million times, you start to see how much you have grown as a writer.
Oh, yeah.
So once you see how much you have grown as a writer, oh, okay, I thought about this idea, but maybe if I implement this and start working that way of really making a positive decision, saying, okay, this is what I felt like, this is what I wrote like 5 years ago. Look how much I have grown
Yeah.
since then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And always try to have that positive spin on it. So, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are so tough on themselves, especially being a writer, especially being something that is a solo activity,
Oh, yeah. But I like doing solo activities. you
which
know,
is interesting,
and-
which is interesting because, yes, I love to write. I love to, make all this stuff up. And they usually say that authors or writers are introverts.
I am.
I am nothing like that. Like I want to be out with people. I want to be, here, there, everywhere. But then I also need a certain amount of time for my time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So in that time, I'm not really a TV watcher. Like I will if I
Fine.
really don't want to work on my book, if I really don't want to
I'm
like my
depressed.
brain is like mush at this point because I've worked all week on a computer and then I, work on my book. I, no, I will watch TV at that point, but I could really care less on TV. But he'll put the TV on. I'll lay on the living room floor. I grab my notebook. I'm in the same room as him, but I just get lost in my notebook. Fine. We'll do it that way. And I can tune out the TV at that point. However, whenever I'm at my
I
computer, I can't tune out the TV. So I put like earbuds in and I'll put jazz
oh,
in. So I can tune out the jazz that's in my ears so I can write. But I'm
I'm
not a
very
jazz
lucky.
person either.
I have an office that is attached to the house, but the way it was added, um, it's once I shut the door, I can't hear what's going on in the rest of the house unless the dog barks. That I can hear. But
Yeah.
I don't ever think of a book as a book when I'm writing it.
No.
It only becomes a book at the end. I call them projects, and I'm working on a project because, to me, like a book
Okay.
just sounds like I'm writing and I'm too, you're doing so much more than writing. You
Yes.
are. So it's a project. And, we do research. And sometimes for me, research is just, I need to go walk down this street because I need to get that feeling
That
of what it's
feeling. Yes.
so I always call my books projects. So people will say, "What are you working on?" I got a few projects, and I'm like, I don't know, they must think I'm painting my house or something, but it's my my books. And getting back to what you said before, I have a book coming out this
Mhm.
spring. It started with a single scene I wrote as an exercise. I
Yes.
wrote about these two characters meeting in kindergarten, and it went and then I went back to it and I'm like, those two little kids
They're still
have,
little kids.
have a story. And if I don't tell it, so it became like a 415-page book. And it started just about the first day of kindergarten and two, characters meeting.
Mhm.
And, now it's a whole book and they have a whole life. And, so those little things that we jot down, they might just be an exercise. They might just be
Yes.
practice. But then
Yes.
they might, and even if they inspire something like, oh, I wrote this scene about, these two characters, but in the background, this was happening, and that's pretty interesting. So I'm going to write about that now. And yeah, I just think it's interesting where things go, and that's why I think it's important to have a practice because you
Yes.
do forget. Like if you stop writing a book, you do forget what happened. I
Yes.
just picked up a new project that I'd worked on years ago, and I'm like, "Oh, I forgot." And then sometimes I'll read it and go, "Did I write that?" Like, "I wrote that." Like,
Oh my god.
Yeah, and sometimes it's good. I wrote that and it's good, and other times like, "Oh, good, maybe I'll just."
Okay, maybe I'll just edit this 4 more times.
Yes, I never delete anything, even when I'm editing. If I have to cut something, I call it a dump file. I take it and I put it there because you don't want 3 days later to go, I
I want
really
that back.
I want that back. So I go and get it. And I told you I went to see Joyce Carol Oates
Yes.
when she did a reading of one of her new novels.
Mhm.
She actually read a chapter she had cut from the novel.
Oh.
And I thought, how cool is that? Like,
Yes.
yeah, this was in the novel, but now it's not, And it's like, but that goes in your dump file. And sometimes you come back to that and say, is there anything in there? If there's not, there's not. Is there anything in there that, when it wasn't for this
You.
book? Yeah, but is for another book. I
Yes.
love those people who like will read a novel and say, oh, there was this minor character and I want to tell his story, So I just
Mhm.
think that's kind of cool. But it's great. Here we are. You said before we came on camera, and we're just regular thing, and it
Yes.
fulfills our lives. Because a lot of people say, well, why would you write if you're never going to be famous? Because we live better
Listen.
lives because we write. you know
Yes.
you know we live
Yes.
fulfilled lives. We live we have periods of great joy. We know what it is to work very hard and finish something. And I'm a teacher, and years ago I had a student and she was in the hallway and she was talking to another teacher, and she
Oh.
goes, I finally know what I want to do. I want to be a writer. And the other teacher said to her, you don't want to be a writer. You'll end up 40 years old living in your parents' basement. And I was so to this day, I'm still, like, so angry because you know what? What if she did live in
What
her
if she did?
parents' basement at 40, but she was writing and exploring worlds and learning how to do things, and
Yes.
when we write about someone else, we're really
Yes.
learning about ourselves as well. So,
Yes.
yeah, maybe she'd never be a famous writer, but things enrich people's lives and it makes us better human beings because we
Yes.
do this. And it's great if we can make money and be famous, but if it
Yes.
doesn't happen, it doesn't mean we wasted our time. Even if you never publish a single word, you did not waste your time.
Right.
You didn't. Um, we learn every book you write, every project, every short story, every poem, you learn something about yourself. You get
Yes.
better at it. We would never say somebody who enjoys riding a bike, "Hey, you're wasting your time because you're never going to be a famous bike rider." But we would
No,
say
you
that,
don't.
yeah, we say that to writers all the time. And it's so people who are starting out, I tell them, of course you want to publish, but if it's not happening right away, that's
That's okay.
okay. Yeah. I think Alan Alda, when he got cast in MASH,
Mhm.
he was older. And he
Mhm.
said many people called him an overnight sensation. He goes, "Yeah, an overnight sensation that took 20 years."
Yes.
So,
Yes.
people don't, we wouldn't expect a baseball player to have never practiced and become a baseball player. We're learning how to do it. Like, you think about people who go to school, I do have an MFA, but like we just, very few people can sit down for the first time and write something that's really great. It,
Yes.
it's like
Yes.
anything else we have to start from scratch.
Yes.
I can't play a piano, and I certainly wouldn't expect the first time I sat down to play. Like, I would have to practice and practice. We have to do that as writers too.
Yes.
And I think that's what turns a lot of people off to writing is they're like, "Hey, I've been writing for 2 years and no one has accepted anything for publication." That's okay. I mean,
That's okay.
and I know it's hard. And I know even me, like, you're looking for a placement for something and you're like, no one's accepting this. Is it trash? Am I writing garbage? But it's, and you have to decide I see too many writers give up maybe just when they're on the brink of
Yes.
success. And, I know people get discouraged because I've worked with a lot of people who get discouraged, or
Yes.
they have a manuscript finished and they can't find some place for it. And just, you read so many, Stephen King, great. He early on, but how many writers took 20 years or 40 years or whatever, how
Well,
many years? Yeah.
and we keep going back to Stephen King. And
Because he wrote that great book on
I
writing.
know we just keep going back to him. But what people don't realize, yes, he's a famous author now. He started from square one.
Yep, just like
He
us.
wrote the first book. I'm sure if you talk to him, and I'm sure that he had 15 million rejections under his belt before he became famous. What makes you or anyone else any different? They just started, Stephen King, Danielle, whoever, they just started before you.
Yep.
You're starting now, they started before you.
And
This is where they're at.
a lot of publishing is luck. I used to be a
Yeah.
reader on a journal, and you might send in a great piece, but that's not what they're publishing that month. Or you might send in a great piece and they got 400 great pieces that month. It's not that your work is crap. It just isn't.
It's not
Or
going to
you
fit
send
the business.
Yeah, or and writing is a business. We see it as an art,
Yes.
but they see it as a business. And when I was reading for the magazine, so they can only publish so many stories. If we get 100 great stories and they want 5, it means that 95 people are going to
Right.
get a rejection. It didn't mean that their story sucked.
Right.
It means that it just didn't fit what we were looking for in this, journal. And so just keep it up. I mean, it just, and send it to places you think. And sometimes it has to rest. Like, okay, so I sent it out to a lot of places. I got rejected. I'm going to put it in a let it rest file, come back to it, see if it needs to edit, and try again. But, you know, I'm often very surprised at what gets accepted of my work. um, I write short stories, and
Mhm.
I've published almost all of the short stories that I've written,
Okay.
except for one that I think is my best, and it
Oh,
has been rejected out of all the other stories.
oh,
I've had stories
that
that I'm
unit.
like, no one will ever publish this, and it gets published. But what I think is my opus of short stories has been rejected more than anything else I've ever written. I'm like, why are people rejecting this? This is such a great story. But you know what? It's one of those stories that's
Right.
kind of young adult, not
Mhm.
adult. And let's face it, literary journals are for adults. There's very few literary journals for young adults. So this story just doesn't fit in the adult journals. Like, I'm probably not going to find a place for it in a literary journal because that's not what they're looking for. It's a story about a 16-year-old boy whose friend dies in a terrible accident, and he's partially responsible for the accident, but no one ever finds out. And people are like, that's a young adult, publish it in young adult. Well, guess
Right.
there aren't a ton of young adult places to publish, which is, if you're a young adult writer, you
Yes.
know that it's hard to get young adult short fiction, young adult poetry. It's harder to get that. The novels, not so much, because that's a real popular genre. But so it's like, here's my, what I call my all-time greatest short story ever written, and nobody is I wrote a short story about a woman who kills her children, and
Oh,
I said, there is no one ever going to publish this story. The
yeah.
first time I sent it out, they picked it right up. I'm like, oh my gosh. So the story that I thought had no chance, no audience, got picked up on the first one. And the story that I think is, I should count in my book because I keep a track. I
Mhm.
have probably sent it out to 100 places, like, and so it is luck of the draw. It's kind of like getting into college. If there's a huge freshman class that year,
Yes.
your chances are a lot less than in a year where fewer people applied. It's just you throw it again. I do research the journals I send to, but you just have to. I have a young adult novel called Ajar, and I remember I sent it to some small presses,
Mhm.
and one small press sent me back a very horrible rejection letter
Oh,
that said, we only publish good writing. And then the the place that took it was like, this is amazing. This is just great stuff. So what is garbage to one person is great to another. And
yes.
we know that because we can, like we were talking about, Stephen King, and horror is not my genre. I don't enjoy
Right.
reading it.
Right.
So, but literary fiction is my genre, and other people are like, literary fiction is so boring. I'm going to shoot myself in the head. So, we each have a genre, and so what's good and what's bad, and we all, let's face it, I'm not going to name them, but we all know that there are some really bad
Right.
books out there, and
Right.
we read it and go, gosh, I write better than this, right?
Right.
So, we tend to be too hard on ourselves. And anyway, that was a long way of saying that.
No,
Keep at it. Keep at it. Don't
keep
give up.
at it. And I think a lot of it, and you mentioned a few things that I think are very important. One fact is you have to keep, I understand that you have to have a routine. Like, I get it. But you also have to learn how to be flexible.
Oh, yeah.
So, what's not going to work for you right now may, be doing something else, whatnot. So, in a way, you have to make your own type of journey with
Yes.
your writing, if you want to make it a business, or if you want to keep it a hobby, if you want to keep it to maybe being just unlisted, that's okay. Keep those muscles going if it's in our brain. Now, with the publishing, are you doing it with traditional publishing? Are you doing it with hybrid publishing? Are you self
Oh,
publishing?
I don't self-publish. I've done hybrid publishing and I've done traditional publishing. But I've also my young adult novel is with a very small press, which is fine. It's I guess yeah, I'd love to be a New York Times bestseller, but everybody has different publishing goals, like you said.
Right, right.
Because I am a teacher and a scholar, I just like to have some publication. So when a student says, "Hey, do you know how to write?" Yeah, I do. Here's what I've
Yeah, here's
written.
my, this is what I
Uh,
wrote.
but some people like yourself write, serials, so people are reading the next book and they like doing that. They feel like they're developing an audience and they're taking them on a long journey.
Mhm.
Other like me, one novel is not related to the next. They're different. I haven't written yet a novel where it's like, hey, I need to tell a second story. Other people, just if they have a some people want to go the traditional route. Of course, that's the hardest route.
Yes.
Um, so I don't have an agent yet because I've always gone through small publishers or hybrid.
Mhm.
But I haven't had much luck well, my novel they told me was too long. So I did go through a hybrid publisher, which was a wonderful experience because everybody's like, "Oh, you're gonna hate it." Boy, it was just like a traditional publisher, only that I had to finance a little, and not a lot.
Yes.
I had to finance a little upfront, because if it was a lot, I would I couldn't
Yes. Oh,
afford it.
I get it.
So, yeah, so, and I have friends who would say, like, "I'd never do hybrid. I'd never do self-publishing." But then other people self-publish and it's works out for them. Yeah, I know the pitfalls of everyone. A
Right.
lot of people self-publish forget to edit, you know.
Oh,
A lot
yes.
of let's face it, we've read traditionally published books that are garbage.
Yes.
So just because you go through a traditional publisher doesn't mean it's they're picking what they think can sell, not what they think is going to win a prize. You
Right.
know, this
Right.
book
Because
actually,
that's
yeah,
their height also.
yeah, and people forget that because my two nonfiction books, once I finished them, I felt like they were selling a product, like,
Yeah.
hey, how can we make this? And I remember I wrote a book called Gone Missing in New York, which is about missing New Yorkers
Mhm.
and the process of how missing people, how the searches go. And they sent me a cover that had New York City skyline on it. And I said, the book is about the whole state of New York. It's not about New York City. So
Yeah.
I was like, I don't really think it's a good cover. But I was only one voice on the committee, even though I was the
Yeah.
author. And they all voted for the a New York City skyline because they thought it could sell more copies. And it's like, but that's not what my book is about. It's not about.
You
So,
didn't read it to understand it.
yes. So, but no, they didn't even care. They were trying to sell
It's
it.
a business now at that, and that's tough.
Yeah, so those 2 books, because they were, commercial, I had very little say over, like, the price of it, the covers, the typeset. I mean, it was just like, after you were done writing, it was like, "Thank you very much," "We'll send you a check," and that was it. Whereas when I went through the small publisher,
Mhm.
they didn't take all my opinion, but they took my opinion. Of course, with the hybrid publisher, I had much more flexibility, but at the same time, they didn't give me an endless, like, here are the options, which one do you like better?
Better. Yes.
Um, and I did defer to them a lot. Like I said, I like these 3, but I'm not, you're the professional, choose out of these
Yes.
3. But some people want total control. I want this. I want then self-publish. So I think,
Yeah.
and I went with a hybrid publisher on my most recent one because every agent was telling me it was too long. And I did cut about 25,000 words, but I really felt I was at the bare bones. and they were
Yeah.
still telling me it was too long. And it's like, I even asked for help with people. I said, could you read it? Tell me what should
What do you?
go.
Yes.
And it is a saga, and I keep saying, aren't sagas supposed to be a little bit longer?
Yeah.
So, I finally went with a hybrid publisher, and
Mhm.
they are selective, so it wasn't like, oh, they take anyone who sends a book in, and they were willing to work with
Mhm.
the longer length. And I I reject the concept that people don't like long books. Maybe there are people that don't like long books, but there are
Okay.
people, hey, people
Yeah,
read
but
Harry
each
Potter.
his own.
Yeah, people read Great Expectations. It's huge. So, yeah, so I did go with a hybrid publisher. I am still looking for an agent for my next novel, which is paranormal in nature, which is kind of weird because I don't write paranormal stuff, and all of a sudden I have a paranormal novel. So I am looking for a traditional, publisher. But then again, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway,
I
so I think people have to find what works for them.
Yeah. My thought process on the publishing aspects was more um, when I was doing my research. Traditional publishing really gave me a bad taste in my mouth, and here's why: they were taking the rights of my book. Well, this is my book, and I want my rights. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these rights, but these rights are mine. So, and that's what really shied me away from traditional publishing. Now, I went to hybrid publishing for my first book, or for my first book, and yes, you had to, put that cost up front and to kind of see and show me what the processes were. I had choices, I had to approve everything that went through, and that was good for what I needed at that time to show me the process of what I needed to do. And when I was writing book two, I still had in my head that I was going to go to hybrid publishing. There was another publishing company that I was looking at, a different one than what I did with book one. And as I was doing the research on all of this, yes, this was an avenue that I wanted to go down. But I also wanted to check out self publishing because there are so many people out there self-publishing books, and then why can't I do this? And just the same thing as with this whole YouTube thing that we were talking about in the beginning, right? So obviously people were doing it, and it can't be that hard. So I put my hybrid publishers and on the back burner for right at that exact second. Went tried doing self-publishing, see if I can do it, see if I could do all the steps and get everything situated. And then if that worked, that's a whole lot cheaper than me taking it off to the hybrid publisher. And I'm doing the same exact thing that they're doing. So I don't have it actually fullish, like totally published yet. I just literally got the last proof like yesterday. So I can finally say, okay, I want to publish it on this day, start doing the pre-orders or cover reveal. Haven't got that far yet in my thought process, but because
Yeah.
that's one of my projects.
Yeah.
but you don't think of it that there are so many different processes with every single thing that you want to do that you have to plan them out to a certain extent, but not too far because you don't want to totally stress yourself out.
Yeah.
So my thought process with two, I actually wanted to have it done by April, with the hybrid publisher. But in reality, when I did the self-publishing, I'm almost done with it now. So I am already a few months ahead of the game of where I wanted to be. But I still got to do the, publishing, pre-order, cover reveal, start getting, some buzz out there so that it's out there that I can sell it when it goes on. Because, I mean, in reality, you're still promoting yourself. You're still marketing yourself. I just had somebody else do everything else, which it was a whole lot easier for me to do this way. Now, margins and getting it into the proper book, however you want it, you know, cover design, everything else was a little bit trying. I'm not going to say, but it wasn't hard. Time consuming? Yes. Patience? You need a lot of, but
Yeah.
it wasn't hard.
Well, I definitely eh, the only problem with self-publishing, and I'm sure you've seen it,
Okay.
is I have gotten friends who have written books,
Mhm.
self-published, and they hand them to me, and I open them up, and I find
So many different,
writing yes,
yes,
or errors that they haven't edited, and
yes. And
it's
you
like
need to edit.
yes, and it's too late now. You've got this book,
Yes.
and you've got, and, um that is and I think that's why the public sometimes is put off against self-publishing because when they pick up that self-published book, they're not sure whether the author has used the process or
Yes.
has just thought, "I'm the greatest writer that ever lived, and whatever comes off my fingers is perfect," and it's
And
not.
it's not.
And that's where there's an issue. Um, Obviously, I've been writing for a long time. I've been a writing teacher for a long time. And there are just some writers that cannot handle critique, they
Okay.
cannot handle the editing process. And they just think nobody loves my genius, so I'm going to self publish. That's very different than
Yes.
somebody who has a book that, for whatever reason, doesn't fit, or the author themselves doesn't fit into traditional things and decides they're going to publish it themselves. So we have those two ends of the spectrum.
Right.
I've a lot of like people who write really strange things and traditional publishers won't touch it. They have
Right.
to self-publish. They don't have a choice. But I remember a friend of mine sent me his book, and in the first page, it was like I couldn't even get off the first page. And it was like, oh my God, what have you done? What
What
have
have you done?
and you can't tell them because it's just like, So I think that's where we are in
Yeah.
the self-publishing. So that's why I kind of like the hybrid publisher because there was always a gate. Like, I can't tell you how many times this book was edited, but I know
A
nobody's going
lot.
to pick it up and find four errors in the first page. I know that's not going to happen. I,
Right.
I know that the pages aren't going to be misnumbered. I know that a professional did the artwork. They gave me advice. When you're
Right.
self-publishing, there's nobody to going, you sure you want to do it like that? And I am a person who needs suggestions. I write. That's all I do well,
That's what I want to do. I want to write.
you know?
I don't know anything, like I'm trying to figure out everything else, but that's where I want to be.
Yeah. And so, it's really a tough field right now,
Yes, it is. It is.
and
And especially when you talked about editing. The mindset behind editing is not to try to make you feel bad about yourself or think that you're not a good writer or think that, you can't do this or you're just out to harass me or there's so many different thought process of trying to help somebody critique their writing. Believe me, I've had a lot of blood, sweat, tears, crying, emotions, everything under the sun with my first book. Believe me, I'm not going to lie. Like, I was, I knew how to write the book, but my grammar was a little bit less than average. But over the years, you've learned how to edit, you've learned how to restructure your sentences, you've learned how to do a lot of things. You know, editing software helps. My mom actually helps me edit my book. I've learned like different tricks to get my editing back in sync. So it's not so horrible for when you put something else out there.
I have the luxury of being able to pay people because
Yeah.
I, you know, I and this is not just for my creative writing, my academic writing and
Yes.
everything. And of course, you do get better because when
Yes,
the
you do
editor
get better.
comes back and oh my God, you made the error 17 times in 2 pages, you learn I'm not going to make that error anymore.
Right. Right.
And, I am an English teacher and I am still shocked about like, how did I not see that? Because
Right.
we see what we think we wanted to put
Yes.
on the page. And,
Yes.
I always tell my students, you're writing a story and in chapter 2, you killed Tony off. And then in chapter 8, you think, hey,
Johnny came back.
I need Tony back. So did you remember to go back and unkill him? You
And kill him.
and those are just little things that an editor can pick up and say, Tony's dead. Like he got hit by a bus in chapter 2. And you're like, oh my God, that's right. I killed Tony. I got to resurrect him. But, those, because I discourage people editing while they're writing. Like,
Yes.
you
I had
know,
to learn that.
and sometimes I actually have a little notebook that I keep next, and I will write, killed Tony in chapter 2, need to bring him back because I need to keep going. I don't want to forget what I'm writing now. And then maybe when I'm having a little slow day, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to go back to
I'll
chapter
just edit.
2. Yeah, I got Tony can't get killed. But like what happens too is like I'll name somebody in chapter 2 and then they don't come back for a while. So now I'm in chapter 9 and I'm like, I can't remember what they called them.
But then you have to go back.
I think I called them Tony, so I'm going to call them Tony here. And then an editor will go, it's Fred in chapter 2 and Tony in chapter 9. Like you need to go back and fix that, or
Yeah.
just kind of stuff like that. Or because this book we got deep editing. I had an editor say things like, in chapter 12 she's doing this and I'm not sure that's consistent with her character. And then
Yes.
I could go back and read and say, is that consistent? Is there something I need to add to make it consistent? Or nah, that's really not consistent with her character, so she's not going to do that. So those are the kind of a second set of eyes can
Yes.
pick up.
You
And that's
need.
painful. Like I said, I've cut whole chapters. Like an editor said, this chapter doesn't move the story forward. Get rid of the entire chapter. And you think like, no, no. And then you're like, yep, it's got to go. And off it goes,
Which,
and
like, yes, you say, yes, it got to go. But in the back of your head, you're like, all
yeah.
right,
Well,
fine.
I do go back and say, does it have to be cut? Like maybe I'm not being clear about something. So this person reading it doesn't
Right.
see what I thought what should
Mhm.
be there. And unfortunately, I had to. This book originally had a prologue,
Mhm.
and I love my prologue. Talk about kill your darlings. We talked before the camera.
Yes. Yes.
I love that prologue. I think it's some of my best writing. Guess what? Boom, gone. I
Because
keep it because every once in a while
I'm put somewhere else.
I go back and read it. But they're right. It doesn't belong with this
Right.
book. The prologue was really for me to get me
Right.
going. It's not
Yes.
my reader doesn't need to get going. They'll start reading the story and get going. So yeah, so it's yeah. It's an interesting thing that we do because not everyone does it the same way. It
Right.
You will talk to 25 successful writers and they
Yes.
will have 25 different ways
Different ways of how they do it.
that they do things. Some people, when they have a problem, will take a nap. Some people will just sit there and work through it. Other people will go to the library and read how other authors did it. And that's why we're kind of like, that old joke that you're building the plane while you're flying it. But we
Right.
are. We
We
are
are.
building the plane while we're flying it, and it's hard, but it's also it's hard but it's not hard, you know
Like, you don't think of it's hard in your head when you're writing these books. Like, you're just getting these characters on paper. You're getting all of this on paper because this is what you feel is fun. But then you have to go through the editing stage, the publishing stage, the promoting stage, whatever else. But in reality, that writing is where you want to be.
See, I love
At least my thought, what I want to be, my goal, a few years ago was I wanted to be a published author. I didn't care if it was I got $5 out of my book. I don't care if I got $50,000 out of my book, which I mean, the 50,000 would be nice, but I didn't care about the money. I wanted to be the published author. Okay, so in 2020, I became a published author. Okay, great. I got my goal. Well, now what? Okay, well,
Yeah.
I got to, what do I need to do next? And now I'm back into the unknown again.
For people who want to make money, there's a specific kind of writing that does make money, and that is what they should do.
Yes.
It's not necessarily fiction, though there is some fiction. But if you're interested in writing some fiction, that you maybe you will. But if so, and there's all sorts of people who sell this is the formula for making a lot of money. But there is some writing that you can make a lot of money on.
Right.
So, do that. Do
Yeah.
that kind of writing.
And especially with the trends going on now, I may not hit the trend that is now. However, 2 years from now, I may be hitting the trend. It just so happened to be whatever.
Yeah.
And now my book's going to skyrocket then. But that's okay because I'm probably at that point, maybe on book 3, 5, 7. I'm not sure. But that's okay because now I have that out. I have this out and we're good.
Well, most people don't realize that when you're published, there's a calendar. So when my books were finished,
Mm-hmm.
I was given a calendar date, and it's often a year or more into the future.
Yeah.
So, you're like done, and my book is, and even my book that's coming out. I can't remember when we started the process, but it was probably a year ago, and maybe it'll hit their calendar in April. I mean, they haven't put it on the calendar yet, but I have the galley right here. I got to do a quick read through. But you don't a lot of times, and if it doesn't fit their calendar, so let's say they have two books on gorillas, well, they don't want to publish them at the same time. So this
Right.
one will be published this year, and that one will be published next year. So you're on somebody else's calendar.
Calendar.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's not up to you. So yeah, so people forget that, and publishing in a magazine, a lot of times, or a journal, they're accepting for a full year ahead of time. So yeah, hey, my story got accepted. When can I read it? Next year.
Yeah.
Next year.
But even with that, I would no, I can't say for all of the magazines or all of the newspapers or everything like that. But I was going to do one of those like magazine articles and stuff at one point. And again, they're taking, you can't use that afterwards. Like if you send it into them and they use it, that's theirs.
It depends. It depends on the journal.
And then I said to myself, well, okay, well, no, I'm going to write for me, not them.
It depends on the
That's just the way
journal.
that's the way I feel.
Most people retain the rights in the journal. They only ask that you don't publish it within the year after publishing it.
Oh, okay.
So
So it could just be something different.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have changed by now. I mean, by the time that I did it was many, many years ago. That could have changed. So, but wow, we've been like an hour and 20 minutes. So I am so glad that we got to talk today because, it's nice to hear other authors and what their processes are and how we work in our mind, in our daily life, fiction life,
Yeah.
writing life, everything. So, is there any type of tips that you would give to these new authors or these new people that want to come in and want to say, hey, I want to be a writer? Which now we know this is not going to be an overnight success, and hoping that they don't think that either. But
well, there's an old movie called "Throw Mama from the Train," and it's
yes,
it's a silly movie. But one of the things that they say, which as much as it's a comedy, they say writers write. So
yes,
if you're not writing, you're not a writer.
you're not a writer.
So, and it
Yes.
doesn't have to be good. It just right. The other thing that I strongly recommend writers do is join or form a group where you can read each
Yes.
other's work and give feedback. And I know, especially if you're beginning, you're kind of like, I don't want anyone reading this stuff, but you do, and
Yes, you
it's
do.
okay. I've been in the same writing group for poetry for about 20 years now.
Mhm,
And luckily, because we've kept the same group for so long, we're really good friends too.
mhm.
So they don't hesitate to say, this one isn't working for me.
Right?
Or this one's working. Yeah, I get excellent, excellent feedback for revision. And
Mhm.
um, I'm I would never publish anything if I haven't had a lot of eyes on it.
Yes.
And in the beginning, it's really uncomfortable in a writing group. But
Yes.
after you get to know each other,
Yes.
you can start to give honest, positive feedback. Everybody thinks feedback has to be negative, but it doesn't. It even if you're talking
Yes.
about revision, I was in a group for quite a while where I was writing a novel, somebody was writing memoir, somebody
Mhm.
was writing historical fiction. It doesn't, you don't have to write the same thing because you
Right.
know what? I know whether a book is good or not, and I might not write that genre. So you are writing for a reader. So it doesn't matter if they write that genre or not. They can tell you whether it's working or not. Like I read your story and this part didn't work, or I don't understand why this guy did that, or
That's a
but
good thing, though.
and I also find that students don't often know what they do well.
Right.
No one says, you are excellent at description. And that's important to know, like, oh, I do this
Yes.
well. Great. Let me look at what I do so I understand what I'm doing. Because if you don't understand what you do well, you can't keep reproducing it.
Right.
So I strongly recommend people join critique groups. That being said, sometimes you have to take critique with a grain of salt.
Yes.
But, 7 people might say it's good, and one person go, this is the worst story I've ever read. Well, maybe you have to kind of not listen to that one, and it's hard. Critique groups are so hard because you're nervous. It's your
Yes.
baby. They're holding your baby. Don't drop
Yes. And they're judging you.
it. Yes.
I mean, you don't want to be judged, but like they're judging you to tell you what you need work on, which
Yes.
in a way that's harsh in your head, but in another way, this is what you needed.
Well,
I mean,
something that you
anybody can tell
said.
you that you have a good book, but somebody that tells you, hey, look, you need to work better on that character. You need to give a better description here. This doesn't match. This doesn't match. They're only making you better.
Well, let me disagree with you. They're not judging you. They're
They're
judging
judging the book.
your writing,
Right,
because
right, right,
people confuse that and they lose their confidence. It's like
true, true.
if I tell somebody I don't like their shoes, I'm not judging them as a person. It's
Right.
just those shoes aren't working with that
I don't like
outfit.
your shoes.
Yes, and it's the same with your writing. They're not judging. They're not even judging you as a writing. This piece of writing works or it doesn't work.
Right.
And that's a really hard place to be because we are so close to our writing that
Yes.
we often confuse it as who we are. And it's not. It's not our character. It's not the kind of person we are. Um, and it's hard. I am an introvert. You said you aren't. And it's
No.
really hard to have someone, even a friend, and I actually recommend it not be good friends in the beginning because your friends are like, "Oh, this is really great," and it's not.
Mhm.
I tell people if I wanted people to tell me how good my writing was, I'd give it to my mother. I'm giving
Yes.
it to
Yes.
you because I want feedback. And it's hard. And you
Yes.
um and you see people get defensive about their work, and all the groups I belong to, you cannot defend your work. All you can do is listen because they'll be
Yes.
like, but no. Because if your book is on a library shelf and somebody takes it home,
You can't say but.
you're not going to be there to explain to them. So it's got to be clear. And you work with a critique group long enough, and it's great. Like if now I'm to the point that, I really need you to look at my dialogue. I'm struggling with that. Tell me where I'm missing, and people can focus in on that.
Right.
Um, but and it's hard, but it's necessary. So those are the
Yes.
suggestions I strongly have. Write every day or as long often as you can, and get feedback on your work. I have a very good friend who's just starting out in writing, and I tell him, even if you just send a paragraph, I'm fine with that. Just send it.
Yes.
We can start talking about it.
Yes.
I When I start with young people, we start critique groups. The first few sessions, I say no one can give any sort of negative critique. Every comment has to be positive, because then that builds our confidence.
Confidence level up.
And then eventually we can get to a place where somebody can say, you've been really giving me positive comments, but I don't know where the story's going. Can I get some feedback? And even if we do it in a positive way, you don't have to say, this paragraph really sucks. You can say, it's not working. And it's because it really sucks doesn't help somebody. Okay. It
No, it doesn't.
sucks. So, but if you say,
Tell me what's wrong.
yes, or I didn't understand, why did this character do that? Or it's not clear from your dialogue, what's going on. Those kind of things help. Like, oh,
Yes.
okay, but it sucks or it's great does nothing for an author, nothing, because so when they say, I like this paragraph, they have to have a reason behind it. I like
Right.
it. Your description is just beautiful. I can picture that room or whatever. So those are the kind of things. I think most libraries nowadays have critique groups, but I tell people, if you can't find one, start one. Call up,
Yes.
you got a couple of friends.
Yes.
I actually do one on Zoom. Uh,
Okay.
when I was studying for my PhD, a group of us just started to work together, and
Hmm.
we have kept up after we graduate. And
Oh, good.
we're in New York, Chicago, Washington, St. Louis. So we're not even in the same state.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And we meet Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And
Wonderful.
what we do is about 4 days before we meet, we send out our pieces and everybody pre-reads them. So, and then when we meet, we ask each person to read just a short part, and then we go over the comments. We don't let the person who wrote speak for the first 10 minutes. We just talk about their writing. And that is so powerful, to just sit there and listen to other people talk
Tell,
about the writing.
oh,
Then we ask them to join in, but they're not to defend. They could just ask to clarify, like, well, you said this, and could you just clarify that?
hmm.
And all our writing, and we don't write the same genre. We have somebody who writes nonfiction. I write
Hmm.
fiction. We have a woman writing a play. We have a woman who writes poetry. So we don't even write the same, and we
It's
live
always
here.
something new.
Yeah, we do it two nights a month.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
now with Zoom, you don't need to physically be in the same room.
Right, right.
I think sometimes if you're physically in the same room, you procrastinate a little bit, but when you're on Zoom, it's like we're gonna get right to it. So anyway, that's my suggestion. Start a writing group.
You know what? And I'm glad that you brought that up because that's what I do on another part of my playlist on my channel on here. I have two different types of playlists. I have one that's a fictional writing prompt, and it's you only write for 5 minutes. And I actually have a box, which I can't get to right now, but it's a box that I come up with different words, phrases, numbers, anything that I can come up with, write them on a piece of paper, put them in a box, and I will sit here and write with you for that 5 minutes. Now, for that fictional writing sprint, after we're done, I will recite whatever I wrote. Now, the one thing that I do say on my videos is I don't care about the spelling, the punctuation, the grammar. I just need your thoughts down on paper. Once you get your thought down on paper, then you can actually eventually edit it later. But you may have this put into your novel. You may have this as a plot. You may have this as something, a novella, something. You don't know what that's going to come up with. And we just picked three things randomly out of a container.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what starts it. Now, I have another writing sprint that I do on my channel, and it's for 5 minutes too, but it's called Writing Sprint to a Better Health. Now, that is another thing that I do where I pick a prompt, I have a question, we write for 5 minutes. Now, this is actually more writing therapy, you know, where, you know, positive vibes survive, because you always need to have a good positive mindset when writing, or at least you try to. And so we'll sit here and we'll write for 5 minutes. Now, it doesn't matter if what you said was right, that's wrong. I don't say what I write at that point, because all of our information, all of our things that we do write, that's what's special to you. So as I kept doing that month after month, these are the last Wednesday of every month in Eastern time at 6 p.m. And then I also have the fictional one is the second Wednesday of every month. So I have it set up twice a month that I do these, just to try to get more people to think creatively or keep those positive vibes, you know, that's in your head. And so you can actually learn from them. You know, so I mean, and that's what I do. You know, if you want to write, like you said, if you want to write, you write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You do whatever you feel is more comfortable for you, that's going to keep you happy at that time.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
Yep. Writer's right.
Writer's right. So thank you so much for coming on with me. We're just going to sit here and, you know, we were just sitting here, you know, just talking about the different processes, and that's wonderful. So there's not really a set formula. There's not really a set way of writing a book, writing a paragraph for that matter, or whatever you want to do. Just sit down, write, and then you just figure out the processes as you go. And what works for me may not work for you. You just have to find your groove.
Yep. Find your groove. I like that.
Right. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you soon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, so if you like these videos and you want to see more of these videos, by all means, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that post notification button, so you can stay on top of all the different things that I post. And till the next time, love you bunches.
Bye.
Bye.